the summer of 2022, Russia has 1.5 trillion rubles left in its coffers. By September, those were gone. But the war is still going. So this begs the question, how is Russia paying for this war? When it comes to funding this so-called military operation in Ukraine, Russia was having troubles from day one. As we all remember, at the start of the war, the West imposed heavy sanctions on the country, thinking that a crippled economy would force Vladimir Putin to stop the bloodshed and end the war immediately. Coca-Cola left, and Russian cola replaced it within a month. Global brands were not available to the Russian population. The car manufacturing industry suffered, but Lada made cars without airbags and sold them just fine. The secondary sanctions blocked all Russian accounts in foreign banks. The Western countries were hoping they could cower Russia into retreating if they limited their money supply. However, that didn't work either. Russia had enough reserves at home to last until the winter. This was a strategic move on Putin's side. Instead of pulling troops back, he used up almost all government money on the war. The next phase was complete. Then came the winter. And with the winter, the need for heating returned. And with it came the demand for oil and gas. Overnight, we found out that Western European countries were dependent on Russian oil and gas. So Putin began the third phase of the funding, the ruble to euro rate. Despite the EU having chased out all of the Russian oligarchs and blocked their assets, Putin didn't fear. He knew that Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, Spain, and many other countries would smash that like button just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, in all seriousness, Putin knew that these countries relied on Russian oil and gas to sustain themselves during the winter. So as any smart tactical player would do, he stopped accepting dollars in euros. Instead, he forced these countries to buy the oil and gas in rubles. This way, the plummet foreseen by analysts was stopped, and Russia was on a new trajectory, one of prosperity. Despite the crippling inflation that was said to have wiped out decades of economic growth, the Russian ruble was going strong, and it has everything to do with the rise in exports after the invasion. Russia is one of the world's largest exporters of raw materials, oil and gas, so breaking a partnership with them would be really difficult. For example, from 2017 until 2021, Russia has done tens of billions of dollars worth of trading with major nations across the world every month. Because Russia is rich in resources, they don't rely on imports. For example, Russia was exporting $9.2 billion worth of goods to China every month, while importing only $4.3 billion worth of goods. Their imports from Germany stood at $2.3 billion, while their exports to the country stood at $5 billion. The Netherlands and Belgium were the same way, and this is probably one of the main reasons the sanctions didn't work. Because how do you sanction someone who doesn't need your stuff? After all, you can't give apples to an apple farmer. So what happened to imports after the invasion? They declined. But to replace them, Russia increased imports from other strategic partners, while the imports from the Western nations, as well as Japan and South Korea, fell over 50%. The imports from China grew by 24%. And of course, then came Russia's exports after the invasion. So if we look at the numbers, we'll realize that only 4 out of 13 countries, less than 25%, decreased imports from Russia. Those 4 countries were the USA, Sweden, the UK, and South Korea. The rest of the countries increased imports from Russia. Basically, they had no other choice. There wasn't anyone supplying raw materials like metals for producing tech gadgets, and there surely wasn't anyone capable of meeting the EU's needs for oil and gas at the time. So China increased its imports from Russia by 98%. India imported 430% more Russian resources. Spain had to import 112% more resources, while the Netherlands' Russian imports increased by 74%, and Germany's imports didn't stay the same, but grew by 38%. So what happened after the sanctions, the freezing of funds, and the seizing of the assets of Russian billionaires abroad? Pretty much the opposite of what the Western officials were hoping, according to this analysis by the Times. These countries were relying so heavily on Russian imports that they had to buy more resources from Russia. only funneling more money to Ukraine. So, despite depleting Russia's coffers with the war, the West flooded the country with more funding. In a way, you could say that these Western countries have smashed that subscribe button just like you should if you haven't done so already. But no, seriously now, they have done the exact opposite of what they said they were going to do. Because Russia is deeply intertwined with the global economy, cutting them out from it would likely cause economic crashes and worldwide discontent. It's very difficult to live without Russian resources. There is no substitute. However, the IMF made predictions about the Russian economy, and they claim that their economy will shrink by 3.4% in 2023. That's a lot less than the 8.5% decrease that we've seen previously. So here's where we stand. The US is limiting imports from Russia, but is also losing exports to Russia. Germany finds itself in a much worse situation. They crippled their economy twice. First, with a decrease of exports by 51% to Russia, and second, by increasing the imports from the said country by 38%. Before the war started, the EU countries and other countries of the world imported about 75% of Russian oil. India and China represented only 25% of the pie. After the invasion, the imports of Russian oil decreased in the EU countries and the rest of the countries in the world. But China and India ramped up imports. Now these two countries are buying 55% of Russian oil exports. So instead of being cut off from the world stage, Russia is merely diverting to different markets. As a result of this invasion, countries like Saudi Arabia, Angola, and Iraq will sell more oil to European nations, while Russia sells more of its oil to China and India. The big shift in markets is happening, and this is just the beginning, according to some experts. With the new markets come new problems. You see, to sell more oil to China and India, Russia was forced to price their oil competitively. That's just a fancy way of saying, buy my oil, I'll give it to you for a cheaper price. So the reason China and India have ramped up the purchase of Russian oil is because of the favorable prices. The problem is worsened by the price cap EU countries are looking to impose on Russian oil. That being said, from March until July of the previous year, Russia received more money from oil and gas sales compared to years prior. This is thanks to the price increases in the energy sector. How Russia will continue to pay for the war remains unclear. All of the EU nations have been finding other sources of natural gas. Russia has giant pipeline networks for the transport of natural gas to Europe. If they lose the market, they lose both the revenue and the pipeline. Importing natural gas to China and India might prove more difficult than ever. Even at a discounted price, Russia would need to build more pipelines to replace the single existing pipeline right now. Still, the Russian Federation relies also on natural resource exports. For example, they are the largest exports in the world of pig iron, nuclear reactors, linseed, raw nickel, wheat, semi-finished iron, and seed oil. Maybe they would shift their focus from natural oil and gas to seed oils. We'll see you in the next video.